The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains of Whiterun. Golden light bathed the landscape, giving the tall grass and distant mountains an ethereal glow. The battalion of Imperial soldiers moved efficiently, setting up their camp with practiced precision. Among them was Remus Varo, a young soldier with a keen sense of duty and a growing unease. Remus drove a stake into the ground, securing one of the tents. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked around. The atmosphere was tense, not just from the looming threat of a Stormcloak attack, but from something more intangible. An oppressive silence had settled over the camp, and it gnawed at him. "Hey, Remus," called Lucas, his best friend, from a nearby tent. "You all right? You seem a bit uneasy." Remus forced a smile. "Just tired, I guess. This place feels off." Lucas chuckled, shaking his head. "Take it easy, Remus. It's just another night in Skyrim." Remus took a moment to survey the plains, his eyes tracing the contours of the landscape under the dimming sky. He noted the eerie stillness, the absence of rustling leaves and chirping insects. The usual chorus of nocturnal life was missing, replaced by a heavy, almost oppressive silence. He strained to listen for any sign of movement or life, but the quiet was unbroken. This unnatural calm set his nerves on edge, making him question what could cause such a profound silence. As he stood there, a sense of isolation and vulnerability washed over him, making him feel small against the vast, silent expanse. The soldiers gathered around the campfires, their conversations hushed, yet trying to stay lighthearted. Remus sat next to Lucas, staring into the flames, unable to shake off the feeling of being watched. He felt a knot of tension in his stomach, every crackle of the fire and rustle of the wind heightening his senses. Captain Darian Holt, a seasoned officer with a stern demeanor, addressed the men. "Keep your wits about you tonight. I want double watches. The Stormcloaks could attack at any moment. Anything moves out there, you report it immediately." The men nodded, their faces grim. Remus glanced at Lucas, who gave him a reassuring smile. Together, they moved to their assigned posts for the night watch. As they took their positions at the camp's perimeter, the eerie silence pressed in on them. "Do you think it's just nerves?" Remus asked quietly. Lucas shrugged. Maybe we're just not used to this kind of quiet. I think it'll be fine." The night deepened, and the oppressive silence grew heavier. The usual night sounds, crickets, owls, and rustling leaves, remained conspicuously absent. Remus's unease grew with each passing moment. "Do you notice how quiet it is?" Remus whispered. "No crickets, no owls. It's like the whole forest is holding its breath." Lucas considered this for a moment, then gave a small smile. "Maybe it means we're safer than we think. Less noise, less chance of attracting unwanted attention. At least we haven't seen any Stormcloaks yet." Remus felt something was off, but he couldn't pinpoint what. His eyes scanned the darkness, more out of curiosity than fear. Suddenly, there was a faint sound, almost imperceptible, a distant, low whisper that seemed to drift on the wind. Remus strained his ears, trying to catch the words, but they were too soft and elusive. "Did you hear that?" Remus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lucas paused, listening intently. Maybe. They stood still, listening, but the sound faded as quickly as it had come. Could be the wind. Remus's sense of unease lingered, but he tried to stifle it, attributing it to nerves and the strange quiet. As the night dragged on, fatigue began to take its toll. Captain Holt allowed those off duty to get some rest. Remus and Lucas headed back to their tent, the eerie silence still gnawing at Remus. "Let's get some sleep," Lucas said, trying to sound optimistic. Remus nodded, lying down on his bedroll. Remus found it hard to sleep, his mind racing with thoughts of the unsettling quiet and the whispered sounds. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and he drifted into a restless sleep. As the sun finally rose, bathing the camp in its warm light, the eerie feeling began to dissipate. The soldiers, tired but unscathed, gathered for their morning briefing. Captain Holt surveyed his men, his face lined with concern. "We'll investigate the area today. Stay vigilant. The Stormcloaks could be trying to spook us. Dismissed." The camp was lively as the soldiers went about their morning tasks. Remus and Lucas were assigned to set up more tents and prepare rations for the day. The routine tasks helped to distract them from the lingering sense of unease. Captain Darian Holt, ever vigilant, walked among the men, offering words of encouragement. "Keep sharp, men. The Stormcloaks won't give us any warning if they decide to attack." Remus watched the captain move through the camp, his presence a reassuring constant. Holt's confidence and experience were a steadying force for the younger soldiers. Despite the tension, the men trusted him implicitly. As Remus and Lucas finished setting up another tent, they were approached by Tiberia, a seasoned scout with a sharp eye and a calm demeanor. "Morning, Tiberia," Lucas greeted her. "Anything new?" Tiberia approached them, her eyes flicking between them. "Remus, Lucas, good morning." She took a closer look at Remus and remarked, "Rough night, Remus. You look like you didn't get much sleep." Remus rubbed the back of his neck and gave a weary smile. "I guess I didn't. The strange silence has been bothering me. It was probably just my nerves." Tiberia's brow furrowed thoughtfully. "Speaking of the silence, I noticed something strange on my early patrol. There are no tracks or signs of wildlife around our camp. It's like everything's avoiding this place." Remus and Lucas exchanged glances. "That's odd. Do you think it's because of us?" "Possibly," Tiberia replied. "Or maybe the animals have moved on for other reasons. Just keep your eyes open." With that, she moved on, leaving Remus and Lucas to their thoughts. Remus couldn't help but ponder the implications of Tiberia's observation. If even the animals were avoiding their camp, it meant something could be deeply wrong. He met Lucas's gaze, who seemed to be mulling over the same thoughts. "You think it could be Stormcloaks using some trick to scare off the wildlife?" he wondered aloud. Remus shook his head slowly. "I don't know. It feels different, more unnatural." Later in the morning, Captain Holt gathered the men for a briefing. His expression was serious but composed. "We're going to investigate the area around the camp. I want to know if the Stormcloaks are nearby, or if there's something else we need to be aware of. Tiberia will lead a small team to scout the plains. The rest of you, stay alert and ready." Remus and Lucas exchanged a look, their eyes conveying a silent agreement. They approached Captain Holt, who was discussing the day's plans with Tiberia. "Captain," Remus said, his voice steady. "We'd like to volunteer for the scouting mission." Holt looked up, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. "You two seem particularly interested in this mission. Care to explain why?" Lucas nodded. "Sir, we've observed some unusual activity ourselves, and believe it would be prudent to investigate further with Tiberia." Holt raised an eyebrow. "What unusual activity?" "The strange silence around our camp, Captain. It's disconcerting. No wildlife, no sounds. Something doesn't feel right." Tiberia, who had been listening nearby, stepped forward. "Their first-hand accounts could be crucial, Captain. They have a knack for spotting details others might miss." Remus and Lucas exchanged a quick, appreciative glance with Tiberia, who gave them a subtle nod in return. "Fair enough. You both can join Tiberia on the scouting mission. Gather your gear and set out as soon as you're ready." With that, Remus and Lucas quickly prepared, their resolve clear. They gathered their gear and set out with Tiberia. As they mounted their horses, Remus beheld the expansive view of the Whiterun Plains. The eerie stillness and absence of wildlife hung over the landscape like an unseen shroud. Yet Skyrim's beauty remained undiminished. The plains stretched endlessly, a mosaic of vibrant wildflowers punctuating the golden grasses, while distant, majestic mountains framed the horizon with their imposing silhouettes. The air was crisp and cool, a sharp contrast to the simmering tension within the group. They rode out, the open plains unfolding before them in silent grandeur. As they moved through the plains, Tiberia pointed out once more the lack of animal activity. "It's strange," she noted. "Usually we'd see some signs of life out here. Birds, rabbits, something." Remus nodded, his focus sharp. "It's unusual, but it doesn't mean there's anything dangerous. We just need to be thorough." Remus felt a sense of determination, his mind set on uncovering the truth. The silence of the plains was eerie, but he remained composed, ready to face whatever lay ahead. "Let's head southeast," Tiberia suggested, her voice steady, "towards Whiterun. We need to see how far this dead silence extends." As they treaded the vast expanse of the plains, their senses were heightened, taking in every detail of their surroundings. The sky above was a canvas of deep blues and wisps of clouds, while the land stretched out in all directions, dotted with the occasional boulder or patch of wildflowers. Tiberia glanced around, her eyes sharp and focused. Lucas squinted, his gaze sweeping the landscape. "Look over there," he said, pointing towards a distant silhouette. "Looks like some sort of monument. Let's check it out." They advanced towards the monument, its form becoming clearer as they approached. The structure stood tall and imposing, a weathered stone pillar with a dragon-like carving at the top. Its surface was cracked and worn, with faded inscriptions that hinted at a forgotten past. Around its base were several smaller stones, some toppled and others partially buried in the earth. They gathered around the monument, inspecting it closely. Remus ran his fingers over the rough surface of the stone, feeling the grooves of the ancient carvings. "What do you think this was for?" Lucas asked, his voice low as he studied the inscriptions. "Could be a marker of some sort," Tiberia speculated. "Maybe a boundary stone or a memorial. It's hard to tell without being able to read the inscriptions." "Whatever it is, it feels significant," Remus added. "Like it's watching over this place." Lucas chuckled. Let's hope it's a friendly guardian, then. I wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of whatever this monument represents. They shared a moment of quiet reflection, each lost in their own thoughts about the history and purpose of the monument. Remus's gaze wandered beyond the monument. His eyes narrowed as he spotted the faint outline of what appeared to be the remnants of an old fort ruin nearby. "Look over there," he said, pointing towards the distant structure. The others followed his gaze. "That looks like an old fort," Lucas remarked, curiosity piqued. Tiberia nodded, her expression serious. "We should check it out, but we need to be cautious. Bandits could be hiding out there. Let's scope out the surroundings before we venture closer." They approached the fort carefully, moving through the tall grass and using the natural cover of the landscape to conceal their advance. The fort's stone walls were crumbling and overgrown with vines, a testament to its abandonment and the passage of time. As they neared the structure, they paused frequently, checking the area for any signs of life. Tiberia held up a hand, signaling for them to stop. "Let's split up and circle around," she whispered. "We need to make sure it's safe before we go inside." Remus nodded, taking the left flank, while Lucas and Tiberia moved to the right. They moved silently, their eyes and ears alert for any indication of danger. The fort loomed closer. As they rounded the final bend, they saw that the ruin was completely abandoned. The stone walls were partially collapsed, and the remnants of columns stood like silent sentinels amidst the encroaching vegetation. The ground was littered with fallen stones and the overgrown remains of what might have once been pathways. "Looks like no one's been here for a long time," Remus murmured as they regrouped. "Still, let's stay alert," Tiberia advised. "We can't be too careful." They entered the fort cautiously, their footsteps echoing softly on the worn stone. The bright sunlight illuminated the open space, revealing the weathered stone walls and remnants of what once might have been a grand structure. Tufts of grass and small plants had taken root in the cracks, adding a touch of life to the ancient ruins. "This place has seen better days," Lucas commented, his voice low. "Indeed," Tiberia agreed, examining a fallen beam. "But there's something about it. It's like the past is still lingering here." As they explored the small ruin, they came across an arched passageway leading to a small alcove. Inside, they found an ancient stone altar with candles still flickering with light. There was an old book, tongs, a small anvil, and an empty alchemist pouch. "Looks like someone was working here," Lucas observed, inspecting the anvil at the center of the altar. "But who would come all the way out here?" "They weren't working," Tiberia corrected him, her eyes surveying the alcove. "They were worshipping. This isn't a working anvil. It's a shrine to Zenithar." Remus inspected the altar, noting the care with which the items were placed. "Whatever the case," he said, "this place feels abandoned but not forgotten." Tiberia glanced around thoughtfully. "Shrines like this one are scattered all over Skyrim. They often serve as temporary refuges for passing pilgrims. This here is probably no exception." She paused, considering the implications. "I don't think this has anything to do with the silence around the camp." She straightened up, her expression resolute. "Let's keep moving." The team continued their search, but found nothing else of note. The eerie quiet and the absence of animal life remained the most unsettling aspects of their patrol. By midday, they returned to camp and reported their findings to Captain Holt. He listened intently as Tiberia described the old fort ruin, the ancient shrine, and the tall stone monument, noting the eerie silence and lack of wildlife. Nothing directly threatening, Holt mused, his brow furrowing with concern. But the lack of wildlife is unusual. We'll need to keep a close watch tonight. Tomorrow, we might need to send a few men to Rorikstead to see if the locals know anything about this. Good work, all of you. Get some rest and be ready for anything. The soldiers dispersed, each finding their way to their tents to gather their thoughts and rest. Remus and Lucas settled into their respective tents, the brief respite allowing them to reflect on the day's events and prepare for the night ahead. The stillness of the camp, broken only by the occasional murmur of conversation, offered a temporary sense of normalcy amidst the unease. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the camp, the soldiers prepared for another tense night. Remus and Lucas, along with a few others, were assigned to the night watch. The oppressive silence from the previous night still lingered in their minds, but they steeled themselves for the task ahead. Around the camp, soldiers checked their gear and whispered amongst themselves, the quiet activity underscoring the tension in the air. A few men stoked the campfires, the flames providing a flickering light against the encroaching darkness. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, everyone on edge but ready for whatever might come. Remus and Lucas took their positions at the perimeter, the campfires flickering in the distance. As the night deepened, Remus noticed the unnerving silence descending upon the camp once more. The familiar night sounds had disappeared, leaving an almost tangible void. It was as if the very air had stilled, pressing in on them with an unspoken threat. Each creak of their gear and snap of a twig seemed amplified, intruding on the oppressive quiet. Remus met Lucas's eyes, both of them acutely aware that this eerie hush had returned, an inexplicable tension hanging in the air like an unspoken secret. "This silence is unsettling," Remus said, his eyes scanning the darkness. Lucas nodded. "It really is." As the hours passed, the silence seemed to deepen. The only sounds were the occasional rustling of the grass and the faint clinking of armor as the soldiers shifted their weight. Remus took a moment to observe the landscape. The wide stretches of the Whiterun Plains lay under the dimming sky, the silhouette of distant mountains barely visible in the growing darkness. The cool night air carried a faint scent of earth and grass, mingling with the smoke from the campfires. Every small noise, from the rustle of the grass to the snap of a twig, seemed magnified. His eyes moved from shadow to shadow, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of discovering something significant, but nothing came. Remus and Lucas rotated shifts with the other soldiers, taking short breaks to rest and recharge. During one of these breaks, Remus sat by the campfire, staring into the flames. "Do you think the Stormcloaks are really going to siege Whiterun?" one of the younger soldiers, Jalen, asked, breaking the silence. "It's hard to say," Remus replied, trying to sound confident. "But we have to be prepared for anything. Whiterun is a key location, so it's a possibility." Remus's thoughts kept drifting back to the old fort. Its walls weathered and crumbling. What had led to its abandonment? Was it once a bastion of hope, or a place of grim fate? And the shrine to Zenithar. He recalled hearing about Zenithar, the deity of trade and commerce. But how could this shrine be connected to the strange occurrences around their camp? Could there be some forgotten lore or hidden power associated with Zenithar that he was unaware of? Remus had always felt a certain discomfort when it came to magic. He knew little about protective wards or rituals and doubted he would recognize one, even if he stumbled upon it. This wild land was truly foreign to him. Skyrim's wilderness held a breathtaking vastness that was both daunting and mesmerizing. Suddenly, a barely audible murmur seemed to drift from the darkness. The familiar, elusive whisper made his skin prickle as he strained to pinpoint its source, but it remained frustratingly faint and indistinct. "Here's that noise again," Remus said, his voice low. Lucas listened for a moment, then nodded slightly. "I hear it too. It is strange." They both strained their ears, trying to catch the elusive sound again. The silence around them seemed almost oppressive, amplifying their senses. After several moments of fruitless listening, Remus began to wonder if their minds were playing tricks on them. The faintness of the sound made him question its reality. "Let's ask the other guards on watch if they heard it," Lucas suggested. Remus nodded, and they quietly moved over to where two of their fellow guards, Marcus and Jalen, were stationed. Jalen, the youngest of the group with a mop of unruly brown hair and a pensive demeanor, was sitting by the campfire, staring into the flames with a distant look in his eyes. Nearby, Marcus, a seasoned soldier known for his steady composure and sharp eyes, stood casually keeping watch, his posture relaxed yet alert. "Hey, Jalen. Marcus," Remus called softly. "Have you heard anything strange?" Jalen looked up from the fire, glancing at Marcus before replying. "What do you mean?" "Like a whispering sound. It's faint, almost like a murmur carried on the wind." Jalen's eyes widened, and he looked at Remus with a mix of shock and relief. "I thought I was imagining things," he admitted. "But now that you mention it, I've been hearing it too." Marcus, on the other hand, raised an eyebrow and looked skeptical. "What is this? Some sort of strange prank? I haven't heard anything," he said, crossing his arms with a faint smirk. "No, Marcus, no prank," Lucas insisted. "Just try to listen more closely." With a mix of curiosity and doubt, Marcus shrugged and joined them by the fire. They all sat in silence, the flames casting flickering shadows on their faces. As they focused, the faint whisper returned, just audible over the crackling of the fire. Marcus's eyes widened, his smirk vanishing. "Oh no." The four of them exchanged uneasy glances, their faces illuminated by the dancing firelight. Each could see the growing concern mirrored in the other's expressions, a silent acknowledgement of the strange and unsettling situation they were facing. "I don't like this," Jalen muttered, glancing around nervously. Remus looked at the group, their expressions mirroring his own unease. "Should we investigate?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We're the only ones on watch until dawn," Jalen reminded everyone. "No one else is awake to guard the camp." "Maybe we should get permission from Captain Holt first." "Captain Holt did say to report to him if anything unusual happened," Lucas added. They all nodded in agreement and made their way to the captain's tent. Captain Holt was awake, poring over plans and letters on his desk. He looked up as they entered, his expression calm but inquisitive. "Evening, gentlemen. Something to report?" "Sir," Remus began, stepping forward. "We've noticed a strange whispering around the camp at night. It's just come up again. We think we should investigate." Captain Holt slowly straightened from his hunched position over the documents, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the soldiers. "You've heard it too?" he asked, his tone serious. They all nodded. The captain's gaze grew distant for a moment as he considered their words. It might not be wise to leave camp at night. This could be a trap. Stay put and be ready for anything. We need to proceed with caution, he said thoughtfully. I'll write a letter to Preventus Avenici, Whiterun's steward, to inform him of these strange occurrences. If this is a prelude to something more sinister, Whiterun must be prepared. The soldiers exchanged glances, feeling the weight of the captain's words. They knew better than to question his judgment. Returning to their posts, they remained on high alert, the mysterious whisper still lingering in their minds. As dawn approached, the first hints of light tinged the sky with shades of deep blue. Remus and Lucas kept on their watch while Jalen and Marcus went off duty. An unfamiliar rustling reached their ears, faint at first, barely discernible against the quiet night. Remus stiffened, glancing at Lucas, who nodded in silent agreement. The sound grew more distinct, emanating from the edge of the camp, where shadows merged with the encroaching darkness. Remus's pulse quickened, the rustling growing louder, now unmistakable. It wasn't the wind or an animal, it was something or someone moving with purpose. The dim light of the approaching dawn did little to dispel the shadows. Remus's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword, his senses straining to catch any hint of movement. Suddenly, a silhouette materialized at the edge of the camp, crouched and furtive. Remus's heart pounded in his chest as he saw the figure rummaging through supplies near one of the tents. He drew his sword slowly, the metallic sound barely audible. He signaled to Lucas, who began to circle around, both of them moving with the practiced stealth of seasoned soldiers. Remus's mind raced, anticipation and fear intertwining as they prepared to confront the shadowy figure. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation. His thoughts raced. Was it a Stormcloak spy, a thief, or something worse? He knew that the next few moments could determine the safety of the entire camp. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air, and his muscles tensed, coiled like springs ready to release. His breath steadied as he inhaled, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the shadowy figure. "Identify yourself!" Remus called out, his voice steady despite the tension. The figure froze, then slowly stood up, raising their hands. "It's just me, Marin," the figure said, revealing herself to be one of the camp's cooks. "I couldn't sleep and thought I'd get a head start on breakfast." Remus and Lucas lowered their weapons, relief washing over them. "Oh," Remus said, sheathing his sword. "Sorry, Marin. With all the unknowns out here, we're a bit jumpy." Marin nodded, understanding. "No problem. I'll be more careful next time." Remus and Lucas exchanged glances, the tension draining from their faces. They both chuckled, relief evident in their laughter. They shared a light-hearted moment, the fear of the unknown momentarily forgotten. As the sun finally rose, bathing the camp in its warm light, the eerie feeling began to dissipate. The soldiers, tired but unscathed, gathered for their morning briefing. "Last night went smoothly," Holt said. "Today we're going to send a small team to Rorikstead to see if the locals know anything about this eerie quiet, and if it means anything. The rest of you, stay vigilant and keep an eye out for anything unusual."